Right now, you've got two major pushes forward happening in KDE. You've got the KDE Goals. These are items that members of the KDE community can push for, can champion, and sort of direct where they want KDE to go. You've also got the €1 million investment into KDE software development, and recently, this has been itemized out as work items on the GitLab. And I was thinking, I could do separate videos on these, but it doesn't really make much sense to do so let's just merge them together and talk about all of it at once. Starting with the KDE Goals. This is a yearly tradition of the past 5 years where basically anyone who is passionate about KDE, even if you're not a KDE developer, a KDE contributor, can become one and become directly involved in leading the charge on a major goal of the project. The specific requirements are outlined over on the wiki, but the core premises is if you're a champion of a goal, you don't have to be the one that implements it, but you do have to do a lot of the other work surrounding it, like the promotion, the advertising, finding developers to work on it, encouraging people to get involved, doing documentation, and you're still leading a goal, it's just you're not writing the code per se. You can write the code if you want to, if you're a developer, but you don't have to be. This will then go through a series of voting, and at Academy 2026, they will announce the top 3 goals that will be the focus of the project over the next year. As a recording, there are currently 7. If there are over 12, they will cull the list down to 12 and then do the voting from there. Let us start from the oldest one and go from there. That is better documentation, opened by Nate Graham. Nate Graham, you may know of various things like This Week in Plasma, insane amounts of bug triaging, being involved in managing the KDE contract from Valve, and a bunch of other things. I know it's boring, I know nobody really wants to work on documentation, but it is really, really important. Compare the documentation that KDE has with any window manager out there. Take something like the Hyperland wiki. And yes, Hyperland does change the way they're doing things constantly, but that documentation is pretty much always up to date. You know exactly what you can and can't change and how to go about changing it. Outdated, misleading, and duplicative documentation is worse than none. It incentivizes people to ask internet forums or commercial LLMs, the former of which expose them to negativity, abuse, and outdated information, while the latter offers sycophantic hallucinations with significant externalized costs. What it will take for this to succeed: shift the focus to tutorials. People reading docs are goal-driven and want quick tutorials, not lectures, about implementation details or abstract concepts. Insist on single sources of truth. Duplicative documentation causes doubt. Retire the user-based and tech-based wikis and ensure everything has a single logical home. Modernize the infrastructure and tooling with Hugo or Sphinx. Make it easier for people to actually contribute to the documentation. Reduce hierarchy and grouping. Information in a hierarchy or a web page is hard to find. Use index pages that organize all topics into logical groups based on use case, not app, and link to all of them. And build a contributor guide. This would aim to eventually replace the patchwork of information on community.kde.org with the goal to be as nice as the GNOME handbook. I will say, whilst I have criticisms of many things that GNOME does, when it comes to documenting what they want you to do, they do it really well. Their documentation is incredible on the developer side. If any of the goals are going to happen, and I know, again, it's a boring goal, this is one of the ones that I would really like to see adopted. But it's not the only really cool one. Another one we have is from Andy Betts, known for many things in KDE design, but recently the upcoming Ocean styling. Ocean is the direction that things are going to go following Breeze. It's not a major shift in the same way that Oxygen to Breeze would have been, but it is still going to be a shift. KDE has a major problem, and that is that whilst it has this really powerful theming system, and theming is really encouraged in the project, it's kind of this weird patchwork system of 7 different ways of doing things that have been bolted on over the years because the old one was a problem, so let's have a new one, but then people don't move off of the old one, so now we have both, and you bolt on another one to deal with both of those problems, and now you have another new one, and you get a problem when this goes on long enough, and KDE is almost 30 years old now. But this goal isn't necessarily focused on the user theming side of things, it's more about the designer side of things, making things more documented, making things easier to get involved in, making it so that if you want to be a designer on KDE, the barrier to entry isn't just lower, but the barrier actually makes sense. There is a clear guideline, there is clear documentation, there is clear processes, and not just for the designers, but for the developers implementing the design, because this isn't just like a designer does one thing, developer does another thing. No, there is a relationship that needs to exist here, and you can't have a project properly function unless the developers actually can implement the designs and the designers can actually make designs that are possible in the implementation. Here we have Accessibility in KDE by Edward Philippus, who appears to be a new contributor. Their account is only a couple of days old, so I can't imagine they were involved in KDE beforehand. Don't get me wrong, this is a good goal to have, but the proposal itself has some problems. Firstly, if you are making a proposal, you are expected to be the goal champion. They are not listing themselves, and no one is currently currently being listed whatsoever. Also, this does exist as a separate goal outside of the KDE goals. Whilst the KDE goals are directing the focus of the project, that doesn't mean that's the only things that are being worked on. There is a paid developer working on accessibility in KDE. This is something they are already going to be doing regardless of the KDE goals. KDE for Enterprise and deployments from Mr. David Edmondson. You probably know David from just as many things as you know Nate from. He is also involved in the Valve contract work for KDE. He has made many things in the project. His name shows up all over the place. Very prolific KDE developer. As a developer, the highlights of my KDE career are when I see KDE in projects that really matter. Seeing it in screenshots of CERN, news of Munich and Pardus are what make the hours worthwhile. With the general shift to open source across more governments in the EU, we should make sure we're at the forefront as a viable option. There is a lot of momentum on this right now, so I am confident we will be able to deliver big results under the scope of this goal. Having it be a selected goal is an opportunity to show that KDE as a community is aligned with this momentum. Alongside some various enterprise-related changes, one of which is also related to some of the stuff we'll see a bit later in the Sovereign Tech Fund segment, but how we'll know we succeeded. SUSE and RHEL ship Plasma out of the box due to customer demand. That would be crazy, but also not unprecedented. Do remember, there was a time where both GNOME and KDE were being shipped together on RHEL. I would love to see this. This would be absolutely insane. Do I think it's going to happen anytime soon? No. Do I think it is very possible with the direction that things are going? Kinda, actually. And of course, with it being work championed by David Edmondson, Nate Graham's involved as a contributor. David's probably going to be involved as a contributor as well, but I don't think you can list yourself in both segments. From another new KDE contributor, give more love to little loved but important KDE apps, which again, like the earlier one, is a completely reasonable goal, but it has some of the same mistakes where they're not listing themselves as a champion, which is explicitly said in the documentation that you need to do, so it's clear that some people didn't read the documentation that was on the wiki. Also, Nate put out a blog post explaining how you're supposed to get involved as a champion as well. Also, though, the main question here is, what are the apps that should be the focus? Because whilst there are apps strewn across this description, there's not really a good outline of these are the apps we should care about, because there's a lot of KDE apps out there, right? Are you talking about caring about all of them? That's a lot of work. Are you talking about a small set of them? What is the set of requirements for the ones that we should give more focus to? This is a totally fine goal. It just needs to be more formalized and properly outlined. Developer-friendly and embracing new technologies from Christoph Gruninja. This has the same problem some of the other ones have, which is not listing themselves as the champion. Why are so many people not reading the wiki, not reading the guidelines on what you need to do? But the goals here are basically just trying to adopt more modern technologies, modern C++ features, modern CMake, discussing the idea of some integration of Rust, making use of modern Qt tooling, and this one's kind of like not really relevant to the others, improving testing, test coverage, smoke testing, and utilizing on GitLab's CI capabilities. This is somewhat relevant to what is described in the Sovereign Tech Fund side. And the last one of the goals, Pillars of KDE Linux from Alex Paul Gonzalez. This is the current president of the KDE EV and many other things in the KDE project. KDE Linux, in case you don't know, this is their sort of replacement to KDE Neon. In this goal, we would like to improve KDE Linux, KDE's software distribution to install on everyone's laptops and beyond. From KDE's perspective, it's hard to ensure consistent quality in our deployments unless we build on top of technologies that we know we can rely on. We aim to make KDE Linux that base and medium to reach our audience in the best conditions. The goals here are to get it ready for OEMs, get it ready to actually ship on devices. The goal isn't to take things away from Fedora KDE or Kubuntu or Arch Linux with KDE or any of these projects, but to show KDE Linux as this beacon of how your KDE packaging, how your KDE support should be done. And surprising no one ever, this has a lot of people involved in KDE Linux involved in the goal. Wow, who would have guessed that KDE Linux people wanted the KDE Linux thing to happen? That's crazy, but I feel like this probably will end up being one of the goals. I think this one, maybe theming, possibly. I would hope better documentation and KDE for enterprise and deployments. That's my guess, but there might be further additional ones that are made that take a better spot. Right now, there's not really that many of them, so it's really hard to decide on, long-term exactly which ones it's going to be. So if you have something you want to champion, get involved. Read the wiki, read the requirements, and I'll leave Nate's post linked down below that also explains it. So don't create a goal where you don't champion it. But this is a good way to segue into the Sovereign Tech Fund work items, because a lot of those are basically orbiting around KDE Linux. And currently there are 7 items outlined. Let us just start from the bottom, because I guess that's what we're doing today. Improve KDE Plasma and KDE Linux QA infrastructure. This item strengthens automated testing for the Plasma desktop and KDE Linux, expanding coverage and building system-level quality checks for boot, login, upgrades, and core functionality. It reduces regressions and allows maintainers to integrate contributions with greater confidence. The main focal points being fix non-reproducible APM-based automatic tests in Plasma software repositories, increased general test coverage in Plasma Workspace and Plasma Desktop, build a more advanced QA system for KDE Linux to catch issues before they end up released to users. So whilst the funding from the Sovereign Tech Fund is earmarked in a certain way and is sort of revolving around KDE Linux, a lot of this stuff, general improvements to Plasma testing, is going to be relevant on Fedora KDE, on Arch Linux, on Kubuntu whenever they update to a modern version, on SteamOS, on anywhere that makes use of KDE software. Improve KDE Plasma's recoverability mechanisms. This item improves system recovery features, including a safe mode. Implement a safe mode for KDE Plasma that disables third-party customizations and aids the user in discovering which ones are causing problems specifically. So you can go and re-enable things one by one and work out, hey, Is this crashing Plasma? Is this breaking this thing? What exactly is happening? Enhanced monitoring tools improve the user interface of the System Monitor app to make it easier to identify misbehaving apps and processes, and more resilient process control during system instability. It increases uptime and makes the desktop more robust. Increase the availability of the existing process termination UI to ensure that it remains available even when the system is in a poor state, e.g. when you run out of memory or experience a graphical freeze. You should be able to use the interface to quit the application. That should take priority. That should take resources away from other things. That should operate in a way where even if everything else is dying, at least the quit button still functions. Implement factory reset functionality for KDE Linux. This item develops mechanisms to restore systems to defined baseline states without full reinstallation, supporting device reassignment and lifecycle management. It lowers operational costs and supports sustainable hardware reuse. And when we are talking about having this on OEM devices, this on devices you can actually buy and sell, this is important. Build a technical system for restoring the system to its factory state for the following domains. Reset the entire system, for example, when the device is being sold. Reset only the system level configuration and state, say when the user is changing teams or departments and needs some new system level configuration and configuration data. And reset only the user's config and state. The device is being assigned to a different user on the same team or department. Build a user interface to control this feature into Plasma's system settings application. This is one of those changes which is specifically for KDE Linux. However, I would hope and I would expect them to build it in a way where other distros could hook into that same functionality and say, okay, I want to do a full system reset, and then Fedora provides their own different mechanism, Arch Linux provides their own mechanism, NixOS provides their own mechanism, rather than having it strictly tied to KDE Linux. Because integration like this would be quite nice in something like a SUSE Linux or a RHEL and various other enterprise systems as well. Improve security infrastructure for organizational usage across KDE Plasma. This expands authentication and disk protection capabilities, including multi-factor authentication and secure boot support. Again, some of this stuff is going to be KDE Linux specific, so implement support for secure boot. Implement facial recognition as a supported authentication method. I know a lot of people really love the idea of Windows Hello. Having something like that integrated directly into Plasma would be very, very nice. Extend support for non-password based authentication methods on the login screen. Implement support for requiring multi-factor authentication, requiring a password as well as a fingerprint. Obviously, that would be optional, but if you're in a situation where you need that additional level of security, having it is very nice. Implement support for re-encrypting the disk or home directory while the screen is locked. Very important. Generally polish up the authentication, locking, unlocking, and decrypting UX. Improve data backup and restore systems. This item integrates file system snapshots and modernizes KDE's backup tooling to provide reliable versioning and recovery workflows. It improves data resilience and reduces risk of information loss. Implement a local Btrfs-based file snapshotting service capable of storing multiple versions of recently changed files with a Kio worker for browsing Btrfs snapshots. Kio is basically just their internal data handling thing. Implement a context menu item for file management UIs to allow restoring older versions of files from Btrfs snapshots or mounted backup disks. That, I think, is super cool. Improve KDE's Cup backup system with a modern UI. Cup is this application, this application right here. I didn't even know it existed. But if you're doing backups in KDE, that is what you are using. Make Cup capable of using a Btrfs snapshot as a data source. Polish Cup's UX for using a network share as a backup target. Network shares are an important thing in this changing. Build a UI to restore from a backup when setting up the system. We have mentioned network shares a number of times. Improve network shares experience. This is something that came up during the LTT Linux challenge where Elijah had some problems with his network share because KDE does things in the KDE way. And Nate Graham recently discussed exactly this problem. This is one of those areas where I think KDE legitimately just has a bad approach to this. Now, if you're doing everything within the KDE applications, it's great, but it does not make it clear that it only works properly in the KDE applications, so thank God this is something being worked on. Implement support for mounting remote shares at persistent locations using KeoFuse. Make KeoFuse mounts appear in the Places panel in Dolphin and OpenSave dialogues. Improve the integrity of metadata such as file creation/modification times and extended attributes when moving or copying files to or from network locations accessed using Keo or KeoFuse. Improve network speed and performance when using Keo and KeoFuse to as close as possible to the level achievable using traditional mounts. Investigate the use of IO Ring to improve the experience of using traditional mounts, and port critical KDE software away from the use of blocking file system calls. This issue with network shares is not something that was first raised by LTT. You can find Reddit posts going back over 10 years talking about network shares being not a great experience. And considering that most people are not using network shares, for most people, this is something they will only see in an enterprise context. I get it. I get why it's been kind of bad, but I am so happy that this is being taken seriously. And lastly, or firstly, technically, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Strengthen configuration management as core desktop infrastructure. This item adapts KDE's configuration system for centralized policy management and integration with established administrating tooling. It enables fleet-level deployment and lowers barriers for institutional adoption. This is something you probably don't care about as a user, but going back to one of David's goals, which was adoption in the enterprise space, use on SUSE, use on RHEL, that becomes incredibly important. Research organizational needs and use cases for centralized configuration management and existing remote management tools. Integrate with relevant industry standard configuration deployment tooling, Ansible, Puppet, Chef, Salt, etc. Based on the result of that research, extend and modernize KDE's existing kiosk system to implement the results of that research and extensively document the results of the work in a way that is useful for and comprehensible by system administrators. This also kind of links back into Nate's goal of having better documentation. This is why I think both David and Nate's goals are probably gonna be goals, and I really hope they are, because it really aligns with the work that's going on here. Anyone who is in a position to vote, maybe keep that in mind, but that's gonna be up to people in a couple of months. I honestly have nothing negative to say here. I think the goals that are currently outlined as the KDE goals are all good goals. Some of them obviously need to have their proposal sort of worked out, but the ones I think which are probably going to get actually adopted, I think are good, and I like pretty much all the work that is being done here with the Sovereign Tech Fund investment, so I have no complaints. Anyway, if you liked the video, go like the video, let me know your thoughts down below. Do you have any problems with any of the goals? Are there any other things you would like to see prioritized? Let me know. So, if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to Daily Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and what a good time to like KDE. Like this.